Hi, my name is Jared Mello, and this is an episode of Mello Mentoring. Today, I'm going to answer a question by a viewer of this channel, and I'm going to answer the question through the radical self-respect lens. I call it practicing radical self-respect. I have an ebook by the same name, and my audiobook, Radical Self-Respect. I'm on the last couple sections here, making it Audible ready, so that'll be available soon. But I'm trying to do this series here where I answer questions and I go over scenarios and I discuss my opinion on how to practice radical self-respect in that scenario. So today's question involves ex-toxic partners, and could also be friends or family members too. But the question goes, what should you do when you have a toxic partner? Do you unfriend or unfollow them, or should you block them? And then the second part of the question is, what do you do when you had a toxic partner or a toxic friend or family member and you have mutual friends, but the mutual friend is closer to the toxic person than they are to us? That's the viewer's question. Thank you very much for that question. And the first part, the key word in that first part is toxic partner. If there's a toxic partner, to practice radical self-respect, we block. Because if we do not block, they're going to try to hoover. They're going to try to get back into our lives. They're going to try to do that any way possible. And if we only unfollow or unfriend, they're going to try to find a way. They can still look at our stuff. They can still comment on our stuff. And the key word is toxic. If they weren't toxic, I would say, yeah, just unfriend or unfollow, because usually in a relationship, one person's usually a little more hurt by the ending of the relationship than the other. And that person who's a little more hurt, they're going to need some time away from seeing anything of that person. And that's just a healthy way to deal with the breakup. Don't torture yourself and stalk that person's social media. Don't torture yourself and try to find out who they're dating and what's going on in their lives. Just clear it out so that you can reset emotionally. Now, again, as a toxic partner, I'd say just block. You block and you don't look back because they're toxic. And what does toxic even mean? It means that they've probably been abusive, or at the very least, they've disrespected our boundaries. So we don't need that. We don't need those kinds of people in our lives. And to practice radical self-respect, we move forward in those scenarios. Now, the second scenario, it's a little trickier, but I still think there's a way out. So, what do we do if we have a mutual friend with a toxic person, and they're closer to that toxic person? Now, for this example, it does matter who they are. So, for example, I have a toxic family member that I've cut out completely. And I do know there are still other family members of mine who talk to that person. Now, I wouldn't say they're closer to him, though, than they are to me. So, I allow that. I allow that because it's family, and it's a tall order for them to completely cut off another family member because of how they treated me. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to let that person back in my life at all, but they know my boundary. And as far as that toxic person's immediate family goes, I just steer clear of them because they are closer to him than they are to me. And to a toxic person, information is currency. Gossip is currency. And I don't want to give them any information about me, right? Because often, toxic person will try to weasel their way back into our lives. Maybe they'll try to help us, like I said earlier. They'll try to help us to get back into our lives. Or maybe they just miss putting us down to make themselves feel better, or whatever the case may be. But we do not need to allow it. So I let that person's immediate family, I steer clear of them. And the way I play it with my grandmother and other aunts that still talk to this person is I'm just careful around them. Right? I haven't told my grandmother about it because I do not want to spoil her image of him in her last years of life. But again, it doesn't mean I'm going to let them guilt and shame me into not having my boundary, because that's another thing you'll notice is that toxic families, unhealthy families, rather than talk to the abusing party and say, hey, why don't you treat this other person better? Why don't you stop disrespecting and abusing them? They'll talk to the person that has the boundary as if they're the one with the problem and say things like, why can't you just get along? They're family. That's blood. What are you doing? Why are you cutting them off like that? Aren't you being a little too hard on him? Aren't you being too much? And it's like, no, we're not being too much. When we practice radical self-respect, I never tolerate abuse. And I never tolerate disrespect. Life is too short to be around people that are going to constantly mistreat us. And if you've grown up in a family that had a narcissistic parent or a codependent parent, we were brought up being made to feel guilty for having boundaries and for standing up for ourselves. But I'm here to tell you, don't feel guilty about it. Own it. Own the boundaries. You do not deserve to be abused. You do not deserve to be disrespected. Now, back to the family member thing. I'm careful with what I share to people that I know will also talk to the toxic person, right? And if other family members were to ask, I would say, yeah, don't tell him anything about me. I don't want him to know anything about me. And if they ask, I would tell them why. But again, for the immediate family, I stay away. For the middle ground family, I play it careful, right? And again, a lot of this can be determined by how severe was the abuse, right? If we were talking about like molestations or rape, then like you may not want to talk to almost anyone that still talks to that person. Just my opinion. Now, what about friends, right? You're a mutual friend, but again, they're closer with the toxic person. I'd say move along. Move along because without a doubt, the toxic person is going to try to pick that mutual friend's brain. They're going to try to find out about us. They're going to try to find out what we're doing, what we're up to. And again, if someone's really a friend of ours, they're not going to want to associate with people that abuse us or disrespect us, or at least they shouldn't. And if they still do, that's not really much of a friend to us, right? So I don't think we should deal with that. And if the person would be closer to us, chances are they wouldn't want to talk to that person either. But if they choose the toxic person over us, and they still talk to them on a regular basis, I would say just move along. We do not need to be associating with people that are friendly with our abusers and people who disrespect us. Again, a lot of it comes down to if it's not a hell yeah, it's a fuck no. And someone that is okay with someone that abuses us, that's a fuck no. No, no, no. Move along. Life's too short for that too. When it comes to family, play it safe, right? And the only caveat to any of these scenarios would be if you have to co-parent with a toxic person. And in that case, you want to have the least amount of communication necessary. And keep it strictly to parenting. And this is going to take some rigid boundaries for people out there to really get it down. But keep it only to parenting and least amount of communication necessary. So, to reiterate, to practice radical self-respect in these areas, if there's a toxic partner, block them. Done. That's it. And the key word is because they're toxic. And even if it was just a regular breakup, there still should probably be some time apart so you can reset your feelings, right? And at least be courteous to the other partner's feelings. You want to be rubbing other dates in that person's face. That's not something that would be pretty cool to do. And in the other scenario, if it's a friend, it's only a friend that's mutual friends with a toxic person that's abused us, move along from that friend, because a real friend to us would not still be friendly with someone who abused us and someone who disrespected us. End of the story. With family, it's a little more difficult. With family, it's a tall order to ask them to not also talk to the family member. But I move on from the family member. I don't talk to them. I cut them off completely, because if someone's nature is toxic, if someone is fundamentally toxic, they are incapable of consistently respecting our boundaries. It's too much of a departure from who they really are. And so they're going to be their nature. They're going to be who they fundamentally are. And so I just go no contact. No contact. And at the very least amount of contact absolutely necessary. And I'm very careful with the family members that I talk to that I also know talk to him. I'm wary. And his immediate family, I don't talk to any of them. So it's kind of like almost a guilt by association, or least amount of contact necessary. That's how I would play it, right? That's how I would practice radical self-respect in that situation. So I'd love to hear more scenarios like this, or maybe romantic, maybe coworkers, more friends or family thing. Whatever it is, I'd love to hear more, and I'd love to give you my radical self-respect perspective in those scenarios. So again, thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day.